me from the hospital at one time to a courthouse here in Dallas for the purpose of filing charges on me, I guess. And I was so sick and pretty much out of it because I was medicated that the judge called the thing off, called the procedure off, which made the ATF very upset because they had been talking about what they were going to do the minute they got me indicted in the courtroom. They would hand me over to federal marshals and they would have the rest of the day off. Unfortunately, since the judge scrapped the procedure, they had to take me back to the hospital. So I never was officially charged, or I should say indicted, by a judge that I knew of. If they did it behind my back without me being present. In November of 1993, all of us that were being held were transferred down to Bexar County in San Antonio, preparatory to going to trial. I had a lawyer that had volunteered to take my case when I was in Parkland Hospital here. He was from Houston. I saw him at Parkland Hospital for just, maybe 30 minutes. I never saw him again until a couple of days before the trial. He came in to supposedly talk strategy with me, and he says, "I can't stay long, I'm on my way to a baseball game." And that was about it. He walked out, and so whatever representation I had was kind of fantasy in a sense. He made up my personal story. He made up most of what he had to say to the judge in his opening remarks, and I was sitting there kind of cringing because a lot of it was not factual. We found in the trial, the government put on almost 7 weeks of testimony. They were trying to find each one of us that had been charged, and there were 11 of us that were put on trial. They wanted to kind of either make an example of us or make us the guinea pigs for what they, various charges pertaining to various aspects of the siege, either shooting an agent or lighting the fire or something like that. And so one of the guys that was put on jail was a young man from England by the name of Livingston Fagan. Livingston Fagan's probably not much bigger than I am. He was very thin. Most of us that came out of the fire on April 19th had lost about 25 pounds in weight because of food shortages, rationing and everything. Hardly any water to drink. So we were kind of puny looking. But in the trial, they tried to charge Livingston Fagan with shooting at an agent. The story was that the agents that had driven in there in 2 trucks and with cattle trailers on the back, the first one that went in, the agents got out and ran around the north side of the building into what would be our backyard, basically. And their story was that when they ran around the north end of the building, they came across, they described 3 guys in like ninja suits, black clothing with masks on, and their immediate reaction was, "Oh, they're our guys." They thought they were their own agents. But they said all of a sudden these 3 guys, 2 white guys and a big tall black guy, start shooting at them. And so when it was all said and done and the fire was over, the only black guy that was a survivor was Livingston Fagan, who had been negotiated out several weeks before the last day. And so they wanted to pin that shooting on him. There was no trying to find out who the two white guys were. They didn't blame anybody as being the other two white guys. A couple of us told our lawyers, please put us on the witness stand and we will testify that Livingston Fagan was not even in the area that they're trying to pin on him, that he was not out there shooting, and you know, we could vouch for that. The judge refused to put us on the witness stand on the grounds that we were party to the suit and that our testimony basically would be self-serving. First of all, they said we couldn't because we were party to the suit. So then our lawyers asked them, well, can we have a separate trial for Livingston Fagan? And that way we could, you know, myself and another guy would be able to testify. And the judge refused that, saying that our testimony would be self-serving, which is kind of ridiculous because all witnesses get up and give testimony that is self-serving, either government witnesses or defense witnesses, you know. So that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But when the trial was over, after 7.5 weeks, 7.5 weeks where the ATF agents and the FBI agents were repeatedly caught perjuring themselves in court, making totally stupid statements at times. You know, in cross-examination, they were caught out numerous times about what they just said. There was nothing ever said about them perjuring themselves, or that they needed to be reprimanded or anything for that. And so it annoyed the judge, who repeatedly came across as very prejudicial. It annoyed him when the jury came back after deliberating for, I think, probably less than a day. They came back with a verdict, not guilty for everybody on the first charge. The first charge that they filed against us was conspiracy to murder federal agents. So all 11 of us were found not guilty. The second charge was aiding and abetting the murder of federal agents. The jury found us all not guilty on that charge. The third charge was having a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. And when the jury came back with the verdict, they found 3 of us not guilty of the third count, but they found some of them guilty, partly because of maybe statements they'd made when they were first interrogated, partly because the FBI wanted to make it look like certain ones had weapons. The young girl from Canada that had jumped out of the window and had a broken leg was found guilty of having a weapon during the commission of this violent crime. She was one of the ones that they found guilty on. The stupid part about it was, this girl was about the nicest Christian you'd ever meet. She did not have a weapon during the shooting. She did not threaten anybody during the raid, either at the beginning or the one that took place on April 19th. But the Texas Rangers had interviewed her in the hospital just prior to her going into surgery for her leg. She was totally doped up, and one of the agents got up and said that she had mentioned a gun. What they basically, in cross-examination, this Texas Ranger said that he had gone to the hospital and interviewed this girl, Ruth, and so they came up with the idea that she had a weapon. So the defense lawyers asked him, well, did you record your interview, your examination or your questioning of her in the hospital? And they said, no, we never record when we, when we question a suspect. We never do that. And they said, well, so how do you know, what proof do you have that she said that she had a gun? And he said, well, I took notes. So they asked him, did he have his notes with him? Well, he didn't, but they called him back another day and asked him to bring the notes with him. And when he produced his notes, he had 3 words on the paper: gun, Ruth, and some other word, I forget what it was. Just 3 words. And on the strength of that, this agent wrote up a report that she had confessed to having a weapon. So during the trial, after the verdicts were read, both sets of lawyers went up to the bench and asked the judge, they says, how can you be guilty of having a weapon during the commission of a violent crime if you're not found guilty of the crime? You're innocent on the first 2 charges, which are the crime. So how could you have a gun during the commission of a crime you didn't commit, or that you were found innocent of? And so the judge said, well, the jury made a mistake. They didn't understand, and so on and so forth, but I've already dismissed them, and it'd be a lot of trouble to bring them back in. I'd only have to tell them they'd done it wrong, and therefore they'd have to change their verdict. He said, I'll just wipe the 3rd count. I'll just dismiss it. 3 of us walked out of court that day because we only had 3 charges on us, and we were found not guilty of all 3. The rest of them, like I said, had various lesser charges having to do with guns or whatever. And so Ruth, who was this girl with the broken leg, she was all set to get on a plane to go back to Canada on the Monday morning when they rearrested her because the judge had changed his mind and reinstated the 3rd count. Going into the trial, we were told that if you got found guilty of the first charge, that is the conspiracy to murder, you would have a 20-year sentence. If you were found guilty of the aiding and abetting the murder of federal agents, you would have a 20-year sentence. But the gun charge was supposed to be 5 to 10 years. And so what happened several months after the trial, the judge, when they came up for sentencing, the judge decided to treat them as if the ones that were still in jail, treat them as if they were guilty of all charges, and he gave most of the men 40-year sentences. We had to go down to the appellate court in Louisiana, 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a 5-judge panel. And unfortunately, okay, they want me to wrap it up, but what happened was, I'll just make this brief. What happened with the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals was that they determined that the judge was overly harsh with his 40-year sentence, and that the prisoners needed to be resentenced. The lawyers had not argued about their innocence. They'd only argued about the length of their sentence. And so the 5th Circuit said that they needed to be resentenced, but then they sent it back to the same judge, Walter Smith Jr. And Walter Smith put the 40 years back on them, resentenced them for the same amount of time. It took 2 trips to the Supreme Court to finally have that 40-year sentence reduced to 15. I'm glad to say that all of our people that were in prison for that 15 years or less, because you can get out a little bit early on good behavior, all of the people are out. Unfortunately, one of the young men that was in there, has since died. But the rest of them are free and kind of scattered around the world. April 19th, we're having our 20th memorial. I'd like to invite all of you to be there. It'll be held at the Helen Marie Taylor Museum in Waco. Quite a few of the survivors will be there from various places, California, Texas, maybe from Maine and other states. All of the foreign ones that were sent back to their own country, of course, are not allowed back in this country for 20 years, so they won't be in attendance. Stuart wanted me to promote this book that he's got. You want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. If you come on the 19th, we'll get a chance to talk some more. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Clive. Clive's got a table over here for a donation. This is the best book written about what happened in Waco. And if you haven't seen the film Waco, Rules of Engagement, or Waco, A New Revelation, we've got them free in several locations. They're must-see. So when the conversation comes up in the future about tyranny, you can remind people, tyranny isn't coming, tyranny, it's here. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. I want to kind of reiterate that these kinds of things that we're hearing takes time. As I mentioned earlier, that Stamp Act was 1765, the Tea Party was 1773, the Coercion Act was 1774, the war ends in 1781. It takes time for tyranny to grab hold. It's a creeping kind of thing. And just think that's 20 years ago he's talking about this horrible event.